You know how when you hear something too strange to be true, you brush it off as a weird coincidence? I used to think that way, until I went to Iceland. This trip, which was supposed to be an escape, turned into something far darker, something that's still hard to wrap my head around. I'll never be the same after this. It started innocently enough. LAURIE and I had been planning this trip for months. I was set to capture the northern lights for a photography project, and what better place than Iceland? We booked a stay at Glacier's Echo, a secluded ice hotel carved out of a cave of blue ice, nestled in the remote heart of the country. It was everything we imagined: cold, eerie, and impossibly beautiful. The hotel was perched on a frozen glacier, with its translucent walls giving everything around it an otherworldly glow. The perfect setting for capturing the elusive aurora. When we arrived, we were greeted by Tarek, a local guide. He had an unsettling presence, tall, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through you, like he could see into the very depths of your soul. He introduced himself in a deep, calming voice, but there was something off about the way he spoke, something that felt like he was reciting words that weren't entirely his own. "The ice," he said, "it whispers. And tonight, it will tell you its secrets." It wasn't just the words that set my skin on edge. It was the way he said them. He didn't seem like a normal guide. He spoke with such an old, knowing tone that it almost felt like he had been living here for centuries. Tarek's eyes never left LAURIE, and she seemed to be entranced. There was an almost magnetic pull between them. LAURIE, usually so vibrant and full of energy, was suddenly quiet, more introspective. I attributed it to the long journey, the unfamiliar surroundings. Still, something felt off. I brushed it aside, focusing on my project. But over the next few days, things began to change. LAURIE started spending more time with Tarek, listening intently to his stories about the ice spirits and the ancient rituals of the land. She seemed captivated, almost as if she were learning something she had been longing to understand. I started to feel like an outsider in my own relationship. She wasn't the same anymore. I watched her drift further away, while Tarek grew ever more enigmatic, his words more cryptic. At night, I'd catch her gazing at the ice walls, almost hypnotized, as if she could hear something I couldn't. Every time I asked if everything was all right, she'd smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. And when I wasn't around, she would often disappear into the bowels of the hotel with Tarek. I tried not to read too much into it at first. I chalked it up to the isolation, the odd magic of the place. But as the days passed, my suspicion grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, especially between LAURIE and Tarek. One evening, I left for a nighttime shoot by the crater of an extinct volcano. The sky was clear, and I had the perfect shot lined up. But something made me return earlier than planned. I didn't know why at the time, but I'm grateful I did. As I approached the ice hotel, I saw them. LAURIE and Tarek were standing outside, in the deep snow, under the shadow of the glacier. LAURIE was kneeling, her hands held in front of her as if she were in some kind of trance, and Tarek was circling her, murmuring something in a language I couldn't understand. The moonlight made everything look surreal, like something out of a fever dream. I couldn't believe my eyes when I heard LAURIE speak, her voice eerily distant. "I'm ready to give up the past. Cleanse me of it." Before I could react, I stepped forward. LAURIE's head snapped up, her eyes empty, vacant, like she wasn't even there. Her expression was so blank, so lifeless. It was like she wasn't my LAURIE at all. I called her name, and it was as if she didn't hear me. Tarek's eyes locked onto mine, and he gave a slow, deliberate smile. The moment I stepped forward, everything changed. LAURIE's gaze snapped back to the ground, and Tarek, with impossible speed, vanished into the darkness, leaving nothing behind but the faintest trace of his bare footprints in the snow. LAURIE remained motionless, her hands still extended, like she was waiting for something or someone. I rushed to her, shaking her awake. "LAURIE, what the hell are you doing?" She blinked as if waking from a dream, confused and disoriented. Her face twisted in confusion when I asked her about the ritual. She had no memory of it, no recollection of anything that had just happened. I could tell she wasn't lying, she genuinely had no idea. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Something had changed in her that night, something I couldn't explain. That night, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't escape the feeling that Tarek had done something to her. But what? And why couldn't she remember? It didn't make sense. Little did I know, the worst was still to come. The next morning, LAURIE was different. She was back to her usual self in the sense that she seemed physically present, but there was a detachment in her demeanor that unsettled me. She didn't seem concerned by what had happened the previous night. Her blank stare, her trance-like state, Tarek's disappearance into the dark. When I tried to bring it up, she waved it off as some kind of bad dream or misunderstanding, as if I were making a bigger deal of it than it really was. She laughed, a hollow sound, but she didn't ask me anything about Tarek. She didn't seem to care. It was as if the entire event had just been erased from her memory. Tarek, on the other hand, was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. I asked around the hotel, but no one had seen him since the night before. His absence only heightened the strange tension that had been building between LAURIE and me. I felt like I was losing her in ways I couldn't explain. I had expected the serene beauty of Iceland to bring us closer together, to be a reprieve from the stress of everyday life. But now, everything felt like it was slipping away, like the threads of our relationship were unraveling before my eyes, and I couldn't stop it. The days that followed were filled with more of the same. LAURIE spent hours alone, wandering the ice caves or sitting quietly near the frozen lake, often gazing at the horizon as if waiting for something, someone, to appear. It wasn't like her. She had always been the type to engage with the world around her, to explore, to be curious. Now, she seemed lost in a world of her own, a place I couldn't reach. When she did talk, it was as if she were in a trance, almost dreamlike. It wasn't just her behavior that was strange. There were little things that kept bothering me. At one point, I found a strange medallion tucked away in her bag. It was small, old-fashioned, and covered in runes that I couldn't read. It felt cold to the touch, even though it had been tucked away with her things, away from the frost of the ice caves. The medallion was shaped like a small, intricate disc, and the more I held it, the more I felt uneasy. I couldn't place why, but something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. I didn't say anything to LAURIE about it, but I kept it hidden in my bag, unsure of what to do with it. Then, a day later, I found a letter in her belongings. It was written in Icelandic, the script flowing in strange, delicate curves. It seemed ancient, like something that had been passed down through generations. I had no idea what it said, but I could make out a few words: soul transition, ancient rites, rebirth. The letter chilled me to the bone. It was clear that whatever had been happening to LAURIE wasn't just some romantic escape gone wrong. Something much deeper was at play here, and I was beginning to realize just how much I didn't understand about this place, or about LAURIE herself. That night, I stayed up late, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. LAURIE was in the bathroom, and I was flipping through the hotel's brochure when I noticed something that caught my attention. There, in the fine print under the list of services, was a reference to something called the ceremony of the ice spirits. It wasn't mentioned anywhere else, but the phrase immediately stood out. I wondered if Tarek had mentioned it in passing. Maybe that was what he'd been performing the night LAURIE had been in that trance. I tried to look it up, but the Wi-Fi was spotty, and the search didn't yield anything useful. I went to bed frustrated, but as I lay there in the dark, I realized something even more disturbing. It wasn't just LAURIE's behavior that had changed, it was me. I could feel myself starting to withdraw, too. I hadn't been as alert, as sharp as I normally was. Something about this place, this icy cavern that seemed to breathe with a life of its own, was affecting us all. I could feel the air pressing in around me, and for the first time, I wondered if we were ever meant to leave. The next day, LAURIE seemed even more distant than before. She went off alone again, this time disappearing for hours. When she returned, her eyes were wide, her face pale, but she didn't say a word about where she'd been or what she'd seen. It felt like she was drifting further away, and I was powerless to stop it. I had to know what was going on. It wasn't until the following evening that things took an even darker turn. I had gone searching for LAURIE again, wandering through the hotel's ice corridors, when one of the employees stopped me. He looked nervous, almost scared. "I saw her," he whispered, glancing around, making sure no one could overhear. "LAURIE. She was walking toward the ice gorge, with Tarek." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't wait for him to finish. I ran. I found her by the edge of the gorge, near the frozen lake. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I approached, the wind howling through the jagged cliffs. LAURIE stood there, motionless, staring down into the dark depths of the gorge. But it wasn't just her. Tarek was there too. He was standing beside her, his back to me, his dark eyes glinting in the moonlight. I called her name. No response. I called her again, louder this time, and her head snapped around. But when she turned to face me, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Her expression was empty, like she was no longer the LAURIE I knew. Her eyes were vacant, like she was staring through me, into something far away. It was like I wasn't even there. "Tarek," I said, my voice trembling. "What have you done to her?" Tarek didn't respond. He simply turned, his gaze never leaving mine, and began to walk away. Slowly, as though the air itself was holding him back. Before I could even react, LAURIE stepped toward the ice. Without a word, she walked to the edge of the frozen lake. And then, she was gone. I rushed to the edge, calling her name, but there was no sign of her anywhere. The ice had swallowed her whole. I ran back to the hotel, heart pounding in my chest, and when I returned with the rescue team, the body was gone. There was nothing left, just the endless stretch of white snow, the frozen lake shimmering under the cold night sky. I didn't know what to believe anymore. LAURIE was gone. Tarek was gone. And whatever had happened to her, whatever had changed her, it was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. But I wasn't done. I couldn't be. I had to find out what had happened to LAURIE. Whatever it was, I knew it was only just beginning. The days after LAURIE's disappearance were a blur of confusion and fear. The rescue team had searched the gorge, combing every inch of the frozen landscape, but there was no sign of LAURIE's body. It was as if she had vanished, as if the earth itself had swallowed her up. And yet, no one seemed to know anything. The staff at Glacier's echo remained disturbingly calm, like they had expected this to happen, or perhaps they had seen it before. But no one spoke of it openly. I couldn't understand why no one was as shaken as I was. I had been there, I had seen her, and I had seen Tarek with her. How could they act as if nothing was wrong? How could they all just pretend? I couldn't stay in that place any longer. The thought of the ice, the caves, Tarek's watchful eyes, it was all too much. But what could I do? Where would I even go? My mind was in a fog. LAURIE was gone, and the only clue I had was that strange medallion and the cryptic letter I had found in her things. The staff insisted I stay in the hotel until they could sort everything out, so I did. But my mind was racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, empty and distant, as though she had already slipped away, as though she had become someone else entirely. I needed answers, but none came. On the fourth night after her disappearance, something strange happened. I had gone out to photograph the northern lights again, determined to get the shot I had come for, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was more important. As I stood alone in the snow, looking up at the ethereal glow of the aurora, I felt a shift in the air around me. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The wind seemed to grow colder, and the ice beneath my feet creaked as if it was alive. The lights above flickered, their vibrant colors twisting and warping in ways that made the world around me feel like a dream, like a place that was half real and half unreal. I didn't know what had happened, but I felt drawn to the old ice caves. The hotel was quiet, and I was starting to lose track of time when I heard a noise, faint at first, then growing louder. The sound of chanting, a soft murmur of voices rising and falling. I knew instantly that it was coming from deep within the hotel, from the ice caves. Tarek. LAURIE. I didn't hesitate. I followed the sound, even though every instinct in my body told me to run in the opposite direction. I found myself standing in the cavernous, frozen hallway, the walls glowing eerily under the dim light of my flashlight. The chanting was louder now, and it wasn't just one voice, it was many. The air grew thick, heavy with an unnatural chill. And there, in the center of the cave, stood LAURIE and Tarek. They were surrounded by a circle of ice, their figures illuminated by a soft blue light. LAURIE was kneeling, her hands raised as if she were offering something to the cold. Tarek stood beside her, his eyes closed, his voice low and rhythmic as he chanted something in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't Icelandic, it was something older, something that sounded like it had been around long before language itself. LAURIE's eyes were closed, too, her face serene, almost in a trance. She looked different. Not in the way she had before. This wasn't the woman I had known. There was something unnatural about her calmness, as though she had left her body behind and was drifting somewhere far away. I froze, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. Should I call out? Should I intervene? Every cell in my body screamed at me to stop, to run, to turn away. But something kept me rooted to the spot. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. I was watching something ancient, something primal. It felt wrong, but it also felt inevitable. And then, I heard LAURIE speak. Her voice was soft, almost musical, but it held an undeniable weight to it, like it was carrying the force of something much older than her. I'm ready to give up the past. Cleanse me of it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't LAURIE speaking. It wasn't the woman I knew. It was someone else. Something else. I stepped forward, my mind spinning, and before I could even process what I was doing, I shouted her name. Laurie. Her head snapped up, and when her eyes met mine, I felt the world around me tilt, as though the very ground was shifting beneath my feet. Her gaze was vacant, cold, and distant, like she wasn't even aware I was standing there. Her face was empty, her expression frozen. I tried to reach her, but I was paralyzed, trapped in the icy grip of her gaze. Tarek turned to me, his smile slow and deliberate. He didn't seem surprised by my presence, like he had been expecting me all along. "This is where she belongs now," he said, his voice a low murmur. I took a step back, my body trembling. What did that mean? Where had she gone? What was he doing to her? Before I could react, Laurie stood, her movements mechanical, and reached out toward the ice. She moved without hesitation, as if she were following some ancient command. Tarek's chanting grew louder, and the air around me seemed to shift once again, the temperature dropping even further. I felt the weight of the space pressing in on me. This wasn't just some ritual, this was something else entirely. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. Laurie stood motionless, her eyes wide and blank, and Tarek turned away, disappearing into the darkness without another word. The moment he was gone, the chanting stopped, and the air grew still. Laurie was left standing there, empty, unseeing. I called her name again, but she didn't respond. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't let this happen. But when I tried to approach her, she slowly turned and walked away, her footsteps silent in the snow. The last thing I heard was her voice, faint and distant, echoing in my mind. "Help me, but you won't understand." And then she was gone. I stood there in the cold, my breath shallow and fast, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what had just happened. I didn't know what I had just witnessed. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever had taken place in that cave, it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. And I had to find out what it was. I had no choice. The night after witnessing the ritual, I was consumed with an overwhelming need to understand what had happened. Laurie, in her trance-like state, had disappeared into the depths of the ice caves, and I had no idea what had become of her. I was alone in the hotel room, the echoes of the chanting still reverberating in my mind, and all I could think about was the strange medallion I had found earlier and the cryptic letter hidden in Laurie's belongings. The letter had never left my thoughts since I discovered it, especially the mention of a soul transition. That term, more than anything else, stuck with me, burrowing itself into my mind like a splinter. It seemed like something out of an ancient, forgotten ritual, a process that had no place in modern life. I knew I had to get answers, and that letter seemed like the only clue I had left. I retrieved it from my bag, trembling slightly as I unfolded it. The script was unfamiliar, but somehow, it felt like it had been written specifically for me to find. The letter's language was old, but I recognized a few words. Soul transition, rebirth, and ice spirits stood out clearly. I had tried to translate it with the help of a translation app on my phone, but it didn't help much. The words still felt out of reach, as though they had been designed to stay just beyond my grasp, like they belonged to a forgotten world that had no place in this one. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. There was something hidden in the letter's archaic lines, something important. That's when I decided to confront the only person who might know more, Tarek. But when I tried to track him down, there was no sign of him. It was as if he had never existed. The staff at the hotel hadn't seen him leave, but no one had seen him since the night of the ritual either. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth, just like Laurie had. That feeling, that nagging sense of helplessness, began to take over. I couldn't explain any of this. Nothing made sense, and yet, deep down, I knew there was something dark and ancient at play here. I just couldn't put my finger on it. The morning after Tarek's disappearance, I ventured out again, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain what had happened. I walked around the hotel, feeling the strange quietness of the place pressing in on me. The usual hum of activity was gone. The staff moved like shadows, barely acknowledging my presence. It was then that I saw something unexpected, a small ice sculpture near the hotel's entrance. It wasn't much, just a figure carved from the ice, but there was something unnerving about it. It was a figure of a woman, delicate and graceful, but the eyes were hollow, devoid of any expression. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling a strange pull in my chest. The figure looked so much like Laurie, but it was different. Her features were all there, but they were distorted, twisted, like they had been chiseled from the ice in haste, as if the creator had been too eager to complete the work. There was an air of finality about it, a sense of something that had already been decided, something that had already happened. It was then that I knew. I didn't know how, but I knew that LAURIE was gone. The LAURIE I had known, the woman I had loved, was no longer here. Whatever had happened to her in that cave, whatever ritual had been performed, it had taken her away from me. The LAURIE who had walked into the ice caves with Tarek was no longer the same person. And whatever force had pulled her into that world, whatever ancient power Tarek had awakened, had claimed her. As I stood there, frozen in place, I felt something cold and heavy fall into my hands. The medallion. It had somehow ended up back in my possession. I hadn't seen it in days, yet here it was, nestled in my palm as if it had always been there, waiting. The coldness of the metal seeped into my skin, and for the first time, I noticed something I had missed before. The runes on the medallion were not just decorative, they were a map. The markings weren't random, they were precise, and they seemed to guide me in a way that made my skin crawl. The symbols twisted and turned in patterns that made no sense, but at the same time, they felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved. I knew then that I couldn't stay here any longer. The medallion had to mean something. It was part of a bigger picture, and it was the only thing left that connected me to LAURIE. If I was going to understand what had happened, I had to follow the clues, even if it meant venturing deeper into this nightmare. But where could I go? What was I supposed to do? My thoughts raced, but all I could think about was the one word that had kept popping up: transition. LAURIE had undergone some kind of transition, a shift that I couldn't comprehend, and I was certain that Tarek, with his ancient knowledge, had been the one to guide her through it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I truly knew about the man. I had assumed he was just a guide, a local helping us navigate the land. But now, I saw him for what he really was, a keeper of something far darker, far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to follow the trail, no matter where it led. The letter, the medallion, Tarek's cryptic words, they were all pieces of a puzzle that I was determined to solve. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized how much I didn't understand. And the truth, when it came, would be far more terrifying than I could ever have predicted. That night, I packed my things and made my way back to the ice gorge, where LAURIE had disappeared. It was the only place that felt like it held the answers I was desperately searching for. But what I found there was more than I could have ever imagined. The ice had shifted. The ground was no longer stable. What had been a solid, frozen surface was now cracked open, revealing a dark chasm beneath, as if the earth itself had opened up, ready to swallow me whole. The darkness called to me, and I stepped forward, uncertain of what awaited me, but knowing, deep down, that I had no choice. The night I ventured back to the ice gorge was one of those nights where reality seemed to dissolve into something unrecognizable. The moon hung low, casting long shadows across the snow, but the gorge itself was bathed in an unnatural darkness, as if the very ground had swallowed all light. The cracks in the ice stretched deep into the earth, dark fissures that seemed to reach down into the unknown. The wind had picked up, howling through the cliffs like some forgotten spirit, and the air was thick with the sharp scent of cold, biting into my lungs. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on me. There was no sound, no life in the air, save for the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of snow beneath my boots. I didn't know why I had come back here, to this frozen chasm. Maybe it was the medallion, the letter, or the strange force that seemed to pull me forward. Maybe I just couldn't live with the not knowing anymore, the nagging feeling that LAURIE was lost to me, taken by something I couldn't even comprehend. I needed closure. I needed to find her, or at least to understand what had happened. But as I stood at the edge of the gorge, looking into the abyss below, I knew that this place was more than just a destination. It was a threshold, a boundary between the world I knew and something far darker. I stepped closer to the edge, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw them. The figures. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, that the exhaustion and the isolation had finally taken their toll. But no. There they were, standing on the ice beneath the northern lights, their forms almost ethereal, glowing in the faint, shimmering light. LAURIE and Tarek. LAURIE was standing beside him, but she was different. There was a strange calm about her, an eerie peace that made my skin crawl. She was dressed in an outfit I had never seen before, a traditional Icelandic wedding garment, intricate and beautiful, adorned with silver threads and patterns that shimmered in the light. The air around her seemed to pulse, as if the very fabric of the universe was shifting, vibrating in response to her presence. She was smiling, but it wasn't her smile. It was something distant, something unrecognizable. Her eyes were vacant, the same lifeless expression I had seen in her face before. She wasn't herself anymore. Not the woman I had known. Tarek stood next to her, his dark eyes never leaving me. He was dressed similarly, in an elaborate cloak of fur and leather, and his face seemed impossibly calm, as though this moment had been predestined, as though it had been written long before I ever set foot in Iceland. He was holding something in his hand, a small object that gleamed faintly in the light, but I couldn't see it clearly from where I stood. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just watched as they stood there, perfectly still, as if waiting for something. Waiting for me, perhaps. The northern lights above them twisted and danced, the colors shifting from green to violet to deep blue, casting a ghostly glow over everything. It was mesmerizing, hypnotic. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from LAURIE. "LAURIE!" I shouted, my voice breaking through the eerie silence. "LAURIE, please, come back to me. You don't have to do this." She didn't respond. Tarek, however, did. He turned his gaze toward me, and in that moment, I felt like he was looking right through me, as though he could see every doubt, every fear, every secret I had ever held. His smile was slow, deliberate, and I felt the weight of it crushing me from the inside. "She has already made her choice," Tarek said, his voice soft but firm. "She has already chosen her path. It is the only way forward for her now." I stepped forward, my legs unsteady, as if the ice itself was pushing me back, forcing me to stop. "What have you done to her? What is this?" My voice cracked, and the words felt foreign on my tongue. I didn't know what I was even asking anymore. It was like I had stepped into a world I didn't belong in, a place where nothing made sense. Tarek's eyes remained fixed on mine, and for a moment, I could see something flicker behind them, a kind of sadness, or perhaps pity. "You can't save her," he said softly. "She's already gone. This is her transition, her rebirth. You cannot follow her, Austin. This is not your world." "No," I whispered, shaking my head, feeling the coldness of the ice creeping up my spine. "She was mine. She was my LAURIE. You can't take her from me." Tarek's expression softened, just a fraction. "Sometimes, to find yourself, you must let go of everything you thought you knew, even the ones you love. The journey she is on, the one she has chosen, is beyond your understanding. It is not for you." I couldn't process his words. I didn't want to. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I refused to accept it. But as I took another step toward them, the figures began to dissolve, like mist in the wind. LAURIE, Tarek, the light, everything, it all faded away, slipping through my fingers like water. The northern lights continued to dance above, their vibrant colors shifting and changing, but the figures were gone. They had vanished into thin air, as if they had never been there at all. I stood there in the snow, numb, staring into the empty space where they had been. I couldn't even tell if I had imagined it. Had it all been a dream? Had LAURIE truly been there? As I turned to leave, my heart heavy with loss and confusion, something caught my eye. I glanced back toward the spot where they had stood and saw something glinting in the snow, a photo. I bent down to pick it up, and my breath caught in my throat when I saw it. It was a picture of me, taken from behind, standing at the edge of the gorge, bathed in the light of the aurora. But what struck me wasn't just the photo itself, it was the inscription on the back. "Sometimes, to find yourself, you have to betray not someone, but your old self." My hand shook as I held the photo, the realization settling over me like a weight I couldn't escape. LAURIE hadn't just disappeared. She hadn't been taken by some supernatural force. She had made a choice. And in doing so, she had left me behind. I didn't know what to think anymore, what to believe. All I knew was that LAURIE was gone, and I was left to face a world that felt more alien with every passing moment. But as I turned away from the gorge, I understood one thing. What I had thought I knew about her, about us, had been a lie. LAURIE had changed, had become something else entirely. And Tarek? He had never been human at all. When I returned to Seattle, I saw the news about the gallery opening LAURIE's new exhibition, Iceland as a Vision of the Otherworldly. The photos, all taken from the exact location where she had disappeared, were displayed in stark, beautiful detail. But there was one thing missing. Not a single photo showed Tarek. Every image was of me, captured from behind, as though LAURIE had been following me the entire time, taking pictures of my every move. And then, on the back of the last photo, I saw the final message. "Sometimes, to find yourself, you have to betray not someone, but your old self." And just like that, I understood. LAURIE had found herself, and I had been the one left behind. The journey she had taken was hers alone, and I could never follow.